What's on your radar that you would put on ours right now, especially with regard to some of these critical decisions that are now before the court? Let's take, for example, affirmative action, which everybody's awaiting a decision on. I mean, I'm sure many legal scholars can give us no doubt, many decisions that Thomas has had, but does this tell us something? Is this very emblematic of where he stands and, frankly, where more of the court's standing, too, because he's been very influential?
Absolutely. Thomas has taken a very strong position against affirmative action since he's joined the court. The heart of his position is that the real victim of affirmative action is not the white person who does not get into, say, Harvard or Yale or an elite school. It is, ironically, the black person who does get in. In Thomas's view, that person, because of this indelible racism in society, that person carries a racial stigma that is put on him or her by white people. And so Thomas has really taken aim at affirmative action for a very long time. And depending on how Justice Roberts decides to come down on that issue, Thomas could be the one who essentially writes the lead decision in that affirmative action case. I have every expectation that the case will be, that affirmative action will be overturned. And whether Thomas writes the lead decision or a concurring opinion, you will see the fruition of 30 to 40 years of thinking about the harm that affirmative action does to Black people.
So let's step back a second, because in addition to studying Thomas, you have been very much, I think, a leading voice in studying the right, if we were to put it like a whole. And the reaction to this case is very much dividing along, blue state, red state, left, right lines. Give us some sense of when you look at the landscape right now. We've got Trump, we've got so many different cases, all these GOP candidates. What are you seeing that, again, gives you some sense of what direction the country's headed in? Because there's some mixed opinions.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the right has actually been having a pretty tough time. Going back to the second term of George W. Bush, in fact, they have not won the popular vote since 2004. And despite the fluke of Trump winning in 2016, the midterm elections and then the re-election campaign since then have been quite bad for the right. The success that they've had has been at the state level, and while they've done some pretty scary things at the state level, that is really a step back for the right. I mean, both of us know that the right, through our adult lives, spent its time trying to nationalize its position.
Yeah.
For it to retreat to the level of the states is not a sign of an ascendant right. It's a sign of a right that's really trying to hold on to its power quite desperately. I think one further interesting aspect to all of this is, again, Clarence Thomas. Thomas, from his early days, really sought to create a kind of conservatism for Black people. That's never really been a politically popular position, but we have seen some movement at the margins over the last couple of elections among Black people, among Latinos, and whether or not, Thomas has always been this sort of this silent figure who speaks for something larger. And in the coming years, we'll get a sense of whether or not that dispensation of Black conservatism, brown conservatism, whether or not it grows or not, and whether or not it reflects the kind of philosophy that he's been trying to instantiate at the level of the court.
Now, I know you're not a pundit or a soothsayer in this respect, but it sounds a little bit like, let's take recency bias, that this too shall pass. This is very much been the script for Thomas's life. The fact that we're talking about it right now is just, it's a moment in time, but there's really no anomaly here that's going to necessarily fell him. I mean, again, we don't know what happens with investigations, but you seem unperturbed by it or unsurprised.
I don't think that Thomas is career on the court is in jeopardy. If anything, every sign has been of his. Ironically, while the conservative movement declines in popular power, Thomas has seen his power ascend. He is now the longest standing member of the court. Should he stay on a few more years, I can't remember how many, maybe 3 or 4, he'll be the longest serving justice in American history. And he has always seen his view as laying down markers, even if he's the only vote for a position. He lays down that marker, and over time, that view comes to be embraced by his fellow conservatives on the court, and now that they have a majority on the court itself. So again, as you say, I'm not a pundit or a soothsayer. What I expect is that Thomas's role on the court, should he should he have that kind of longevity in his as a person, will only continue, and that his power on the court will actually grow rather than shrink.
It's interesting. So as the legislative branch has suffered, the judicial branch, has been ascendant under him, and that may explain so much attention, of course, on the Supreme Court. Thanks for joining us, Corey.